这片国土的中心，蓝天下辽阔无垠，一种精神在涌动，价值观坚定且真正。从高山到大草原，从城市到大海，我们捍卫自由，信仰与家庭并存。我们深入探索，揭示内心的信仰，保守价值观，深深下根于灵魂之上，以勇气与荣耀，我们坚定不移，维护自由与传统，在这片属于我们的土地里。
Hey everybody, and welcome back. We are doing something a little different today. Going to be diving into Chinatowns in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You know, those bustling neighborhoods with the incredible food,
Yeah.
the iconic red lanterns, the sense of community that you just don't find anywhere else. Well, our deep dive today is going to explore those very same Chinatowns,
Okay.
but with a twist.
Ooh, a twist.
We'll be looking at them through the lens of national security.
Interesting. So kind of looking at the same places that everybody knows and loves, but from a different perspective.
Yeah. It's definitely a fascinating and maybe a bit of a controversial way to look at these vibrant cultural hubs.
Yeah, I can see that.
And our guide for this deep dive is an opinion piece called The Hidden Threat
Okay.
by Samuel Carter.
The hidden threat.
Now, before we get into it, just remember Carter's views are his own
Yeah.
and don't necessarily represent any official positions or anything like that. But his writing definitely raises some thought-provoking questions.
Okay.
So you ready to unpack this with me?
Absolutely. I'm ready. Let's dive in.
Okay, great. So one of the things that I found really interesting about Carter's piece is that he does a really good job at first of acknowledging
Yeah.
the rich history and cultural importance of Chinatown.
Yeah, he celebrates them as symbols of diversity, and I think rightly so.
Yeah, absolutely. But then he takes this kind of unexpected turn
Okay.
where he suggests that amidst all this cultural richness, there could be these underlying security risks we can't ignore, especially,
Right.
given the current state of U.S.-China relations.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Not the first thing that comes to mind when you think of Chinatown, right?
Yeah. I have to admit, when I first read that, I was a little taken aback.
Yeah.
It almost sounded like something out of like a spy movie or something.
Right. It does have a bit of that dramatic flair to it.
Yeah.
But Carter argues that with this U.S.-China relationship becoming more and more complex, we need to consider these possibilities. And, one of the biggest concerns he brings up is the potential for espionage.
Espionage in Chinatown. That's a pretty serious claim. What exactly does he mean by that?
Well, imagine this. Imagine like individuals embedded within the community, not just your average resident, but someone who has been placed there specifically to gather intel,
Okay.
Blend in, use technology to monitor activities. It's not as far-fetched as it might sound.
So not just your friendly neighborhood shopkeeper then?
Yeah, exactly. And for law enforcement, this presents a real challenge. I mean, how do you navigate these environments? How do you investigate these potential threats without disrupting the very fabric of these communities? It's a very delicate balance.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can see how that would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
So espionage is one concern, but Carter doesn't stop there, does he?
No, he doesn't. He then moves on to something perhaps even more subtle, which is China's economic influence within Chinatowns.
Okay.
If you think about it, a lot of businesses there rely heavily on Chinese imports or investments.
Yeah.
And Carter argues that this dependence could be used as leverage.
So it's not just about the cultural ties, it's about the financial ties as well.
Exactly.
How would that leverage work? How could that be used against us?
Well, imagine a scenario where a vital product for businesses in Chinatown is heavily reliant on imports from China. Suddenly, they have significant control over the supply chain.
Okay.
It's almost like holding a key to the community's economic stability. It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
It really is. It makes you think about how interconnected everything is and how even seemingly local issues can have, these global implications.
Absolutely. But there's another layer to this that Carter points out, and it's perhaps the most controversial of all.
Okay.
And that is the idea that China might be trying to exert influence on community and political activities within Chinatowns.
Okay, now that's really getting into some complex territory. What makes him think that?
Well, think of it this way. If you wanted to promote a particular narrative or, Perhaps silence dissenting voices. A close-knit community could be a very powerful platform.
Right.
And Carter suggests that Chinatowns, with their strong cultural identity, could be susceptible to this kind of influence. It's almost like using the community as a stage to shape opinions and perhaps even sway political views.
Wow. So we've gone from potential spies to economic leverage to shaping narratives. This is definitely a lot to unpack.
It is a lot to unpack. And what's even more intriguing is how Carter proposes we deal with all of this. He lays out a whole roadmap of countermeasures. And the first stop, well, it's probably going to raise a few eyebrows.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, me too. Enhanced surveillance.
Yeah.
He thinks we need enhanced surveillance by law enforcement and intelligence agencies in these Chinatowns.
That's a controversial one, isn't it? It feels like we're walking a tightrope here between security and freedom. On the one hand, we want to be safe, but on the other hand, we don't want to live in a surveillance state, especially where it feels like, entire communities are being targeted based on their ethnicity.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. And Carter acknowledges this tension. He highlights the need for a very nuanced approach.
Right.
One that respects individual rights. This isn't about creating a climate of fear and suspicion.
Yeah, it's more about being aware of potential vulnerabilities without resorting to these extreme measures that could erode the fabric of our society.
Right.
So if increased surveillance isn't the only answer, what else does he propose?
Well, this is where things get interesting. He emphasizes the need to build trust and cooperation with Chinatown communities.
Okay.
He says working with these communities rather than viewing them solely through a security lens is crucial.
So it's about building bridges, not walls.
Precisely. It's about fostering genuine partnerships based on mutual understanding and respect. Instead of imposing solutions from, above, it's about engaging in open dialogue and finding solutions that work for everyone.
Because at the end of the day, these are American communities.
Okay.
These are our neighbors, our friends, our colleagues. We can't just let fear or suspicion dictate how we interact with each other.
Absolutely. And to further counter that potential economic leverage, Carter suggests diversifying Chinatown economies to reduce reliance on China.
So it's like saying, let's empower these communities to stand on their own 2 feet.
Yes.
Give them the tools and resources they need to thrive independently, which would in turn reduce any potential for external pressure.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing the entrepreneurial spirit and resilience that already exists within these Chinatowns.
Yeah.
They've overcome immense challenges throughout history.
Yeah, this feels like a much more constructive approach. But it's not just about government policies and economic strategies, is it?
No.
Carter also talks about the role of the individual right.
He does. He stresses the importance of public awareness. If people understand the tactics that are being used to exert foreign influence, they're less likely to be swayed by it.
So it's about being informed citizens.
Yeah.
Being critical thinkers.
Exactly.
Not just accepting everything we hear or read at face value, but really taking the time to understand different perspectives.
Yeah.
To consider the source and to be aware of our own biases.
That's exactly right. It's about fostering that healthy skepticism, not becoming paranoid or distrustful of everyone.
Right.
But simply being aware of the information that we're consuming and the forces that might be trying to shape our views.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. We all have biases.
We do.
We all have preconceived notions, and sometimes we gravitate toward information that just confirms those biases.
Absolutely. And that's where things can get really tricky, especially in today's world where information spreads so quickly and it's not always easy to discern fact from fiction.
So this deep dive isn't just about Chinatowns then, is it? It's about being informed and engaged citizens in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and interconnected.
You hit the nail on the head again. It's about recognizing that our actions, our choices, our beliefs all have ripple effects.
Yeah.
And it's about being mindful of the forces that might be trying to shape those choices.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the potential security concerns raised by Carter, the historical and cultural context of Chinatowns, and this delicate balance between security and freedom.
Yeah. We've also touched on the importance of community engagement, economic diversification, and public awareness as potential countermeasures to some of these issues.
It's been a fascinating conversation, and I have to admit, it's made me think about things in a new light.
Me too.
But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
This idea of China potentially trying to shape narratives and influence political views within Chinatowns.
Yes, that's definitely a point worth delving into a bit further.
Because it raises some really important questions.
Yeah.
How do we distinguish between, legitimate cultural exchange
right.
and potentially manipulative propaganda.
Right.
How do we ensure that freedom of speech is protected while also being aware of attempts to spread misinformation or suppress dissenting voices?
These are very complex issues, and there are no easy answers.
And I imagine that line between, healthy skepticism and just unfounded suspicion can get pretty blurry.
It absolutely can, but that's why it's so important to have these conversations, to think critically about the information we're consuming and to be willing to challenge our own assumptions.
So what are some practical steps that we can take to navigate this tricky territory? I mean, how do we stay informed without getting overwhelmed or falling prey to fear-mongering?
Well, one thing we can do is be mindful of the sources that we rely on for information.
So don't just blindly trust everything you see on social media.
Exactly. It's important to consider the source, their motivations, their potential biases.
So look for credible news outlets, fact-checking websites, and diverse perspectives. Don't just get stuck in an echo chamber where everyone is reinforcing the same beliefs.
That's a great point. It's also important to be aware of our own emotional responses to information.
Okay.
Fear, anger, outrage. These emotions can be very powerful motivators.
Yeah.
But they can also cloud our judgment.
So take a deep breath, step back, and try to analyze the information objectively.
Exactly.
Don't let your emotions hijack your critical thinking skills.
Exactly. And remember, it's okay to be skeptical, to ask questions, to challenge assumptions.
Yeah.
That's how we learn and grow.
And how we avoid being manipulated or misled.
Yeah.
So it's about being informed, engaged, and discerning citizens.
Yes.
But it's also about respecting the diversity of perspectives and experiences within these Chinatowns.
Absolutely. These communities are not monolithic.
Right.
They are vibrant and diverse with a wide range of views and opinions. It's important to remember that.
Okay, so we've talked about espionage, we've talked about economic influence, we've talked about political narratives, and now this complex issue of information and influence. I feel like my head is spinning a bit.
It is a lot to take in, for sure. But I think what's really important to remember is that while these security concerns are valid and worth considering, we shouldn't let them overshadow the incredible cultural richness and historical significance of Chinatowns.
That's a great point. It's about finding that balance, isn't it? Acknowledging the potential risks without resorting to measures that would undermine the very values that we hold dear.
Exactly. And it's about remembering that these are American communities made up of individuals who contribute to the fabric of our society.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. We've unpacked Carter's arguments, we've delved into the complexities of information and influence, and we've emphasized the importance of critical thinking and community engagement.
It's been a thought-provoking conversation.
It really has. But before we move on, I'm curious to get your thoughts on something that Carter briefly mentions but doesn't fully explore, and that is the potential ethical dilemmas that arise when we talk about things like surveillance data collection and profiling, especially in culturally sensitive areas like Chinatowns.
That's a really important point, and it's definitely a topic that deserves further exploration.
Because on one hand, we want to be safe.
Right.
We want to prevent harm, but on the other hand, we don't want to live in a society where entire communities are targeted based on their ethnicity or their origin.
Exactly. And it's not just about Chinatowns. These are concerns that arise whenever we talk about national security measures that have the potential to impact civil liberties and individual rights.
So how do we find that balance? How do we protect ourselves without sacrificing our values?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. But I think it starts with having open and honest conversations.
Yeah.
Like the one we're having right now.
I agree. It's about acknowledging the complexities, considering different perspectives, and being willing to challenge our own assumptions.
And it's about remembering that the most effective solutions are often the ones that are developed collaboratively with input from all stakeholders.
Absolutely. It's not about us versus them. It's about finding common ground and working together to create a safer and more just society for everyone.
Well said. Now, I know we need to wrap up soon, but before we do, I want to touch on one more aspect of Carter's piece that I found particularly intriguing. He talks about, the need for economic diversification within Chinatowns to reduce reliance on China.
Right.
But he doesn't really delve into what that would look like in practice.
That's true. Yeah, that's a great observation. It's one of those areas where the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
And it raises some interesting questions.
Like, how do you encourage diversification without inadvertently pushing out existing businesses.
Right.
Or disrupting the cultural fabric of these communities.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And it requires a very, a deep understanding of the unique economic ecosystem
Right.
within each Chinatown. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah. So it's not just about, throwing money at the problem.
Right.
Or imposing some top-down strategy.
Right.
It's about working collaboratively with community leaders and business owners and residents.
Yes.
To develop solutions that are tailored to their specific needs and aspirations.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that incredible entrepreneurial spirit and resilience that already exists within these communities. I mean, they've faced challenges and adapted throughout history.
Yeah, so rather than viewing Chinatowns as, vulnerable or dependent,
right,
we should be looking at them as sources of innovation and strength.
Precisely. And I think that's one of the key takeaways from this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
The importance of shifting our perspective.
From viewing Chinatowns through a lens of suspicion.
Yeah.
To seeing them as these vibrant, dynamic communities that contribute to the richness and diversity of our nation.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of our world, the complexities of the U.S.-China relationship, and the importance of, informed, engaged citizenship.
So to our listener out there, what stands out to you in all of this? What part of this deep dive's really gotten you thinking?
Well, I think Carter's piece offers a very unique perspective on a familiar topic. It challenges us to think critically about the world around us, to be aware of the forces that shape our perceptions, and to recognize the importance of individual agency in navigating this very complex landscape.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even in seemingly ordinary places, there can be these undercurrents of geopolitical tension.
Absolutely.
And that our choices, our actions, our beliefs all have ripple effects.
So as you walk through your local Chinatown, savor the delicious food, appreciate the vibrant culture, you can also take a moment to reflect on the broader context, the interconnectedness of our world, and the role we all play in shaping the future.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
Carter's piece focuses specifically on Chinatowns, but the questions that he raises have much broader implications.
They do.
How do we as a society balance the need for security with the preservation of our values, our freedoms, and our cultural identity?
That is the question, isn't it?
It really is. It's a question that requires careful consideration, ongoing dialogue, and a commitment to finding solutions that work for everyone.
Absolutely.
So to our listener, we leave you with that challenge, that invitation to think critically, engage deeply, and continue exploring the complexities of our world. Until next time.
蓝天下辽脱无垠，一种精神在涌动，价值观坚定着真身。从高山岛到草原，从城市到大海，我们还为自由信仰与家庭并存。我们深入探索，坚持内心的信仰，保守价值观，神圣之语于灵魂之上。我们的土地里，我们珍视水法，它让我们自由无惧。